we just watched your lesson together.
Yes.
Looking at it again, how do you feel like your lesson went?
I think it went really well. I think the story was a good choice as far as like grade level goes. They were engaged. I primed them, with at the end of this lesson, we're going to get a reward or a treat. And so they were engaged during the activity. I think the hands-on manipulatives worked for some to keep them engaged, and some others, had a hard time, as you saw in the video, keeping them to
Yeah.
themselves. But I do think it went really well.
Yeah, and I will say I think you introduced those manipulatives like right at the perfect time during the book activity. They were starting to get a little bit antsy, but that was great how you kind of read the room on that and you realized like, okay, I need to kind of do something and you adjusted quickly. It was
Right.
so effortlessly though and done so smoothly and right at the right time. You gave them the manipulatives that kind of helped readjust them, get
Right.
them back in it. So I thought that was great at like managing your groups really well.
Mhm.
So after watching the video again, how do you feel like your lesson created and maintained effective environments for student learning? This is your CSTP2 that we
Right.
talked about. How do you feel like you did towards that?
I feel like they were able to learn at their pace or at what they understand. And I had to be flexible and change for some students. But I feel like they were able to understand the concept of the story. When we did the activities, they were able to understand like each item that we did review over the activities, um, creating and
Mhm.
maintaining environments. And so I feel like it was positive, and they were engaged the entire time.
Yeah, they definitely were. And I saw a lot of the skills like within the CSTP2 um,
Mhm.
during that lesson. One of the things I thought was really good is like when you told them like, okay, we're going to get into groups, your kids knew the procedure, they knew the routine, they knew exactly where to go. It was very clear that they've heard that language before. It's very familiar to them.
Right.
And that's right in line with standard two, because I can see that definitely like create a climate where it's consistent, and with that consistency, that's how we get the
Right.
learning to go forward.
Right.
So I thought that was awesome. Um, how do you feel like the kids did in terms of like meeting the learning objectives for the lesson or for the goal that you had?
Right. So I really just wanted them to be able to understand the context, stay engaged, be engaged, and keep that follow through for the activities. I know when we got to the activities, I could really see the connection through the story and through the activities. They were really talking about, of course, mainly the cookies. Um, but as we were going through the story and using the manipulatives, they were able to match the milk with the milk, the straw with the straw. And so I think they do understand, and I think those manipulatives really come in handy and are beneficial when working with our students.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think being that your kids are so little and they have so many different challenges in terms of their learning, picking something that's really engaging and that's something that they really like cookies. I mean, who doesn't like cookies?
Right.
Is smart. That just boosts your engagement and it kept them going. And there was a different type of, you know,
Right.
activity for each thing. And that kind of
Right.
kept them on their toes and wanting to know what was going to be next. So I thought that was
Right.
great. Um, in terms of your effectiveness of your teaching practices, so in terms of that, your pre-observation, we talked a lot about the instructional strategies that you were going to use during the
Right.
lesson, so like differentiating, using the different modalities
Mhm.
to deliver the content and things like that. How do you feel like that aspect of your lesson went?
I think it went well. I do have to do it, and like before even reading the story, I did have to prime them. So a way that I do that is like I will show them an online video. I will try and show them like a video of somebody else reading the story and see if they're engaged that way, listening. That way, but sometimes just finding like a clip of a play by play of the story, they're more engaged, and then actually bringing that big book out and having them in that small group and turning the pages and having them match the manipulatives. And then after that is when we went into the activities. And so it is really a good lesson, and it takes time and planning, and it doesn't just happen in one day. You have to, prime them with what we're expecting, and then even the follow up, continuing to talk about that lesson and sharing. And so, yeah, I think it was all inclusive in the lesson, but it does take time overall.
It does. Yeah. And doing that technology piece, like incorporating that as well, really helps tap into their prior knowledge. It kind of gives you an idea before you go into that lesson, like number one, what their engagement is. Number two, if they recognize anything, things like that. I think that really is a good way to tap into that. One thing that I observed, which again, I was really, really impressed with, was that connective piece that you used where you had the cookies on the work sample. And so, this was a great extension for kids who are verbal or kids who, are a little bit higher in terms of their academics. There was something for each learner to do on that piece. So, it targeted their reading. They had their writing and their math for counting, and then also their fine motor for actually having to like write the thing or write the number that goes with it. And so I thought that was a great connective piece for your higher learners, but then also, exposure to those concepts for your other learners as well.
Right.
How do you feel like that piece went in terms of the work samples? Like, how did that give you an idea of like what they were learning? How did it assess what they were able to learn in your opinion?
Yeah. So I would say out of the small group, a few of them were able to really understand and go ahead and do the activity without really needing adult support. But then there were a few that did need adult support. And so it was myself and one of my aides that helped with the activities. I think one thing we could have done ahead of time is for our lower students, actually like on one of the activities was cutting out items or the objects of the story to match them. And so now that I have reviewed it and think about it, I should have like highlighted where to cut the objects out. That would have just been an easier transition for them on that specific activity. Some we had a hand over hand count and help them circle the correct answer. But overall, I think it was a good activity across the board. All three of them were well done, and I think they did engage.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great reflection. I think sometimes like the pre-planning and getting the materials ready and cut out and things like that will help with like the downtime. And then also for some of your other students who maybe cutting isn't the goal, like we want them to learn how to cut, but what we want to do right now more is focus on the language aspect, the vocabulary aspect, having those types of things pre-made or pre-cut will help kind of decrease that downtime. So I agree. I think that's a great thing to keep in mind moving forward. And then also I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned in the pre-observation, one of the things that you feel like you kind of struggle with is like how you're assessing the learning of your nonverbal kids versus your verbal kids, because you don't get that back and forth. How do you feel like that went during your lesson in terms of like, how did you know if your little guys who were not able to tell you were processing the information?
I feel like out of all the activities, the matching one really is beneficial for our nonverbal students, because after cutting the objects out and laying them out across the table, they're able to match, and that does show me that they understand that the straw matches the straw, and they may not be able to say that, but visually they see that and they understand that concept. So I think out of the three activities, that was the best one to assess their knowledge on identifying the objects and understanding those things.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I thought you did a really good job during your book activity of, you asked a lot of WH questions. What is it? What do you see? Things like that. But I noticed that for your nonverbal kids, you had them point. So you said, point to the tree, point to the mouse, point to one cookie or things like that. Them being able to do that also gives you that informal assessment on, okay, if they are kind of with you and what they're doing. I also thought you did a good job in terms of the book activity of assessing their engagement. And that's a whole piece in itself is if they're not engaged, you're not going to be able to know what they're able to understand. So that piece I thought you did a great job with as well. In terms of like, if you ever had to do this lesson again, is there anything that you think you would want to do differently or that maybe you would change?
I think just as far as like prepping a little bit better as far as like the activities go. And then through the big book, just making sure throughout every page, because sometimes you can get a little bit mixed up and you just want to flip through the pages and read the story, but slowing down and really having the students match the objects that they had, the manipulatives, to the pictures of it in this story, and taking time and really elaborating on what they see in the story, the pointing, the touching, all of those things. And then for the verbal kids, allowing them to verbalize what they see as well.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I know we kind of talked about like next steps in terms of like ways to kind of extend or differentiate or, elicit some of that understanding for your
Mhm.
nonverbal kids.
Mhm.
I know like one of your goals is to keep progressing with your CSTP2, the standard two.
Right.
I was thinking too, one way you could do, during that same activity is you could also kind of turn it into like a turn taking and a behavioral norm expectation of like, okay, so and so is sitting nicely, you get to turn the page. And so,
Right.
and things like that, kind of reiterating those
Right.
attending skills and things like that, I think within your group would be something next, moving forward, you could
Right.
kind
Right.
of incorporate as well. But I overall thought your ability to manage, even though, yes, you were running a small group, but within that group, you had several different kids who were at
Right.
completely different levels. And so I thought you did a great job of managing each kid's skill set within that group so that they were able
Mhm.
to participate, engage, and ultimately show you that they understood what you were, what you were teaching.
Right.
Um, in terms of this whole process, like, moving forward, watching the recording, participating in a pre-meeting observation or pre-meeting and then observing the lesson, watching it
Right.
together, how do you feel like this process will help inform your planning and your instruction moving forward?
I think just having somebody like you that is there to help you plan, and give feedback is really important, because sometimes we think we are doing it all and we know our students and we know what our groups are going to look like, but having the feedback aspect of it is really eye opening. Because yes, I know to do turn taking, but in that moment, it wasn't something that like came to mind, and I think that would encourage the other students who may have not been on their best behavior or sitting nicely in their chair. It encourages them as well. So I think
Yeah.
having the post and like what our vision is for the lesson, and the pre of what our vision is, and
Mhm.
the post just allows that feedback and communication.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think it's really, you can go into a lesson with everything ready and thinking it's going to go one way, but that's kind of the skill set that we as teachers have to have in terms of our ability to adjust, kind of quickly, because sometimes, like, things go wrong or things come
Right.
up. And so I thought you did a great job on that. And, these CSTPs really are a guide for us to try and strive for in terms of like our progression in our field and things like that. But we may never master all of them because
Right.
we're continuing to grow and we're continuing to learn, and it's a learning process. And so I think your willingness to participate in that is huge, and I think that's great. How do you feel like right now? How do you feel that you succeeded in your teaching practice?
Seeing the reward at the end of like the activities, that the students are able to do what is expected is rewarding, and just seeing it throughout the day, or in other lessons, because we continue to do these types of lessons, and so seeing them engage and really understand, I think that's the most rewarding part.
Yeah, I think definitely when you're targeting those things over time and there's lots of opportunities, you start to see the generalization of those skills.
Right.
And that's huge, especially for these little babies who have to work so much harder and they have so many other,
Mhm.
difficulties that they're struggling with. Seeing that generalization really shows you too that, hey, they are retaining this, they are
Right.
learning, they're taking something away. What can I do in terms of what would you like to see for me to better support you as your instructional coach?
I honestly, it's been great. I feel like the feedback though is really, I know a lot of people don't really want feedback or to be like critiqued, but not in a bad way. I think that really helps us do better